Welcome to Thoughtful Planning, the place where real conversation, expert insight, and a touch of humor meet to turn our end-of-life uncertainties into self-assurance. I'm your co-host Santiago, a history buff and a big kid at heart.
And I'm Honey, your guide through the intricate dance of planning with care and a whole lot of warmth. Every week, we're here to turn those intimidating "are we ready" moments into confident "everything is under control" moments. Today's journey is one you won't want to miss. Hi, welcome to Thoughtful Planning. I'm Honey. I want to share a content warning for the listeners. This episode contains discussion about the role I took as a caretaker when my husband was battling cancer. The content may be emotionally challenging for some listeners. So, everyone will have their own experience. My goal is to share my experience as I remember it as a caretaker of a throat cancer patient in 2016. At the time, we were told this was the last stage before there was no options for a cure, so it was actually caught in the nick of time. So I'm going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. So stop listening if you're not ready to hear this. In past podcasts, we've mentioned to plan while you're clear of mind. And we've talked about how during a crisis, such as my husband's cancer fight, that there's really no time to plan because you're too busy fighting. Last week, which happened to be the end of September 2024, my husband had another surgery from the terrible side effects of radiation to widen his throat. And we got to talking, and we've never shared the details of what it's like to actually be in the fight. So we decided to share 2 podcasts with you. One, which is this one, will be from me to share the caretaker point of view, and one from my husband, the fighter, which will be released on October 22nd of 2024. But first, let's start with the essential question. Why is it important to plan for emergencies or end of life while you're clear of mind? So I'll start with our story. We had our final military move to Bernie, Texas, and we were excited for our new chapter. My husband mentioned he had something in his throat, and I thought it might be related to his recent root canal, as he mentioned some pain. So he was given some meds and still continued with pain. He went to the ER, and then they sent him to see the ear, nose, and throat specialist. Soon after, he had a biopsy, and then shortly after is when we were given the news. Through it all, I had a positive mindset that they were just being cautious and all would be fine. So when the doctor delivered the news that he had stage 4B throat cancer, it was as if I was in the Twilight Zone. The doctor left us in the room and I was in disbelief. He came back and we were given some paperwork and told we would be seeing the radiologist and oncologist, as well as other different doctors in the hospital. I remember walking around the hospital afterwards to locate the various places we'd be going, so I knew where to park and so I knew where to go for the upcoming appointments. The doctor had also given us a support group to attend, which was located off base in San Antonio, because the support group within the hospital was only for active duty soldiers. Now, we did attempt to attend this group, the support group, but the building was abandoned and there was no support group actually. And that was really tough as we really had no one to talk to that had already experienced this. Now today, I am aware of several caretaker groups and even a throat cancer group on Facebook, which I will include those in the show notes in case you need them. After we got the news, we went to my mother-in-law's to give them the news, and we called our kids. Our son was about to start his freshman year at St. Mary's University, go Rattlers, and our daughter was about to start her final semester at North Dakota State University, go Bison. So I had just started my business on July 1, and actually that's when we moved into our home too, July 1 of 2016. I had one client. So I notified that client to let them know the situation and that I could still work, but my schedule was going to be erratic. And I gave them the option to cancel the contract. Thankfully, they didn't cancel, and I was able to continue to work. On July 25th, while I was at home with our son getting all of our household goods delivered, my husband was at his first radiation appointment to meet his doctor and get the information about what would be occurring, which happened to be 7 weeks of radiation, Monday through Friday, because the joke was cancer doesn't grow on the weekends. We also attended a nutrition appointment later on so we could learn helpful tips like foods that would be good to eat and that plasticware would be preferred, as silverware would have this metallic taste to it. My husband did accept the option to have a PEG tube, which I'll refer to as a stomach tube, placed in case he wasn't able to eat through his mouth anymore. And I'm glad he opted for that. In addition, my husband had surgery to get the chemo port added, which was around the upper part of his chest. Once all that was done, then the radiation began, along with 3 rounds of chemo spread out over 7 weeks. Through it all, life still goes on. Yard work still needs to be maintained. The home still needs to be kept clean. Bills need to get paid. We had boxes that needed to get unpacked. Our son needed to get moved into the dorms. We also had 2 dogs to maintain, and we both had our day jobs. Fortunately, my husband was able to work most of the time, except for about 30 days. So with a stomach tube, whether you use it or not, you have to keep it clean by flushing twice daily. Eventually, the radiation was very intense, and my husband did need to get food through the stomach tube. This was definitely a challenge and an adjustment. I remember a day when we finally got the food in, and my husband was sleeping propped up on pillows in the bed, and the top of the tube had come open, and all the food came out, and I just wanted to cry. That's when I learned to tape the top with a specific kind of tape. I also learned that those tops from the tubes, that they will eventually wear out. So you would unscrew it and then attach a new one. So you'd always want to make sure that you have a backup. We were able to get early morning radiation appointments. So we would wake up around 5 a.m. to get ready and then leave the house around 6 a.m. to get to our appointments on time, which included having enough time for my husband to be able to walk inside. So you'll want to think about this as the patient becomes weaker, they'll take a little bit longer to do things. So let's not rush things. Let's try to be patient, but also be mindful of planning ahead. So leaving yourself enough time is helpful. And those appointments, they'd last about 30 minutes. And then I would drop my husband off at work and help him get inside and get settled. Then I would go home and I would work until about 3 in the afternoon. Then I would go back and pick him up. When we would get back home, I would try to help him get food through his stomach tube or mouth and administer medication. And then this was definitely challenging as we navigated this new way of eating and drinking. I remember for the second chemo, he hardly had any food in his system and he was very weak. But his doctor said he's getting chemo. To give you some perspective, my husband is 6 feet tall and he started around 185 pounds and quickly dropped to about 135. It might have been less too. Shortly after the second chemo, we ended up in the emergency room, and that's when we were introduced to a feeding pump called the Kangaroo Joey Internal. I wish we had this from the beginning. There was a learning curve to finding the right type of food and then the speed of the food, but we finally found what worked while we were in the hospital. And I was definitely glad as I paid attention to how they managed the pump in the hospital, because we were told that a nurse would come to our home and help us get everything set up. But since we were discharged after 5 p.m., the nurse we were supposed to get called us while we were driving and said they couldn't drive out to our home to help us. And instead, they met us at a gas station on the corner of IH10 and Wurzbach in San Antonio. I felt like it was a drug deal in the parking lot as we moved boxes from her car to ours. Then I went home, and after I got him settled, I set up the IV stand, and then I almost got the pump set up, but I was stuck. And so thankfully, my neighbor, who's a pharmacist, came over and showed me that I was missing one little step, and then I was able to get my husband set up to eat using the pump. I also learned how to use the backpack that came with the pump. It's really cool. You could put 2 bags in it, one for water, one for food. That backpack was amazing. And then that helped him get his food while he was at work throughout the day. And then at night, of course, we had the pump along with the IV stand and with the bags that we would put the food and the water in so he could eat throughout the night as well, which was also super helpful. And I wish that I had known about this from the very beginning, as I think this would have eliminated the 2 emergency room visits we encountered. Now you know, and if you have a loved one going through this, make sure to ask for the pump. I also recommend taking a video of anything they teach you to help you remember what to do when you're alone. Now I'm going to share some tips to help you as you go along your journey. So you'll want to keep a daily journal to record doctor visits and document what they say. You'll want to document things like how often the patient goes to the restroom, like what type of deposit they're making to include any vomit, medication given and times. How does the patient feel? Record any falls if they have any. My husband fell about twice. The chemo drug was cisplatin, and that has a side effect of neuropathy or numbness, which can cause a fall. I actually eventually moved my desk downstairs to the dining room table so that I could monitor him while I worked. You'll also want to eliminate smells in the house, such as perfumes, flowers, even odors from cooking. I usually ate sandwiches or salads and would brush my teeth afterwards. If you have any guests, make sure to tell them please not to wear any perfume, as this can cause nausea for the patient. I also recommend you get a pill crusher, a recliner that does not rock, a shower chair, and if you can afford a bed that elevates, that would add some comfort to the patient. If possible, I recommend you get all this stuff before the treatments begin. Personally, we were getting all this stuff as things were happening. So hopefully by me sharing helps you ahead of time. Now let's talk about some buckets. If you're in the San Antonio area and you're familiar with Bill Miller's, then you know what I mean when I say the tea buckets. I had at least 3 of the Bill Miller's tea buckets, and I would line those buckets with paper towels. So we actually had those select a size bounty towels, and you know how you can obviously select the size. I would grab 2, fold in half, and then lay it one way, and then get 2 more, fold in half, and lay it the other way. And pretty much that covered up the whole bucket. And this would definitely help my husband because he had to spit a lot. And so whenever he spit, then I could eat quickly and easily empty out those paper towels from the bucket and just replace with clean paper towels. And it just made for quick cleanup and very easy. And I had about 3. I would put them like where he sat in the living room and then on his nightstand. And then I just had a backup one to quickly replace as I would take one out to clean and then put a clean one in. You'll also want to get some vomit bags when you're in the hospital and keep those in your car for when you're traveling. Those will be very helpful. In addition, you want to get a go bag ready at all times. You'll have it ready. So in there, what you can include would be a couple of outfits because sometimes liquid from the stomach tube or even from the port, it wets the clothes or your pants and it just is not comfortable. So it's nice to have an extra pair of clothes to be able to change into. So keep 2 pair of extra clothes. And then you'll want to also include some deodorant, medical cards, your toothpaste and toothbrush, a phone charger, flip-flops and or slippers, a journal, the things that you've been documenting along the way, a list of medications, and if possible, all the medications. Bring them with you as you never know when you'll get stuck in traffic. And then a minimum of 2 water bottles, some gloves, or hand sanitizer to make sure your hands are clean. Now, I preferred that he not drive during this time as I wanted to be there for all his appointments and I didn't want him to have an accident either. And then another tip is when he would get medication, I would always make sure the doctor was prescribing liquid or a medication that could be crushed. So, not all medications can be crushed. So, you always need to ask. Either the doctor or the pharmacist should be able to tell you. And don't assume that because you're going through throat cancer that the doctor will prescribe these liquids because sometimes doctors aren't perfect and they forget. So it's always in your best interest to ask the question so you're not having to call the doctor and continue waiting for them to redo the prescription. And actually, to this day, we do still ask this question when going to the doctor if there's any medication prescribed, can it be in a liquid form? And actually, for Tylenol and Motrin, those do come in the kids' liquid form. So we get that, and you can just ask your doctor how much you should take um, for your body size. Now, I would also keep a large Tupperware bowl in the sink, and this would be used to clean the syringes used with the stomach tube. And then eventually, just so you know, as you're cleaning those, I would always use fresh water, soap, a paper towel to wash those things. Then they would get dried. But as time goes on, you're going to notice that those syringes, they'll wear out. So eventually you're going to need to order some new syringes as soon as you'll start to know because they'll feel different. As they start to feel different, order some new ones. And then you should be provided a list from a supply company that you'd be working with to be ordering all the supplies that you need. Now, towards the end, I was administering medication every 2 hours. And so I would lay all the medication out in the kitchen counter and get it as prepared as much as I could ahead of time, just so I could have as much sleep as I could during the night. Because if you can imagine having to wake up every 2 hours is very tiring. So try to get all that prepared ahead of time. And regarding pills, I wanted to share a little tip that I learned along the way. When you go and if you have to do like a urine sample at the hospital, those little cups that they give you, I had one of those cups and then I would put just a little bit of water in there, just warm it up. And then I would put a pill in there and then it would dissolve that way. Or you can just use your pill crusher. But that was something helpful that I used when I had to put the medication through the PEG tube or the stomach tube. And again, you will just ask your doctor or the nurse that'll be there to give you their tricks that they might have too. All right. Also, we were fortunate enough to live around family, not too close, but close enough. So my mother-in-law, she would come every weekend and help. She was a lifesaver as she made sure that the house was clean. She would give our son a ride home from the dorms. She would make sure we were all fed, and she would prep the bandages for me to make cleaning the stomach tube fast and easy. You'll see, I'll leave in the show notes, I'll leave a link that you can go to get the supplies that I used. And it'll talk about all the bandages and all the supplies that I used so you'll know what I'm talking about. And my brother-in-law, he also came over to take care of the yard. And like I said, we had just moved into our home. It was July 1. So even our builder at the time, he helped with our yard a few times too. He sent someone over to take care of that. And then I also had a neighbor that would deliver food a couple times, which was appreciated. So if you have a friend that's being a caretaker right now, helping a loved one, maybe reach out and ask them, or maybe just send them a gift card. It could be a Visa gift card and they can pick whatever they want to pick to order their own food to help them out. Or maybe you can reach out to get their landscaping work done for their yard, something to that effect. All right, you'll want to be aware of the side effects from radiation. So they are continuous, and you will need to consult doctors on how to properly care for the teeth afterwards. Your loved one probably won't be able to open their mouth as wide as they used to. And they will also have to take special precautions, such as a hyperbaric chamber for certain procedures. So you'll want to make sure and ask anytime that you need to have anything done with your mouth. Make sure your dentist is aware and your doctors are aware, because you want to make sure you take those special precautions. Now, we've been very lucky as my husband is cancer-free, and I hope and pray that your loved one has the same result. All right, so I hope you have a better understanding of what being a caretaker is and does, and how you will just be exhausted. And this all means if you want to plan for things like a will, your medical directives, or powers of attorney, you're going to be overwhelmed. So this is why it's important for you to plan while you're clear of mind, because there's more to planning than just the few things that I referenced. And you really don't want to be worried about those things either while you're in the fight. You'll want to focus on rest and getting better, not on all the planning stuff. Plus, I think it's easier to talk about planning and death while you're not in a life or death situation. When you're in the fight, it makes it really difficult to talk about death. You really just don't want to. So I'll include a link in the show notes, like I mentioned, to some of the supplies that I used that would be helpful for you. Some things I just purchased at the local grocery store. But in the notes, I talk about how we would take surgical scissors and cut those bandages so that they would be easy to use when we needed them. Also, it talks about the type of food that we used. Like I said, there's an adjustment phase if you're noticing, and the doctors will help you understand all of this, but the patient may not adjust well to a certain type of food, but there are different types of foods that are out there on the market. So they will test, and then you'll find what works best for your loved one. All right. So again, keep in mind my list is from 2016. So some of the items listed may be outdated. So you want to just keep that in mind and just ask your doctor what's current for this time, for your current time. So as you think about the topic today, I want you to reflect on the essential question. Why is it important to plan for emergencies or end of life while you're clear of mind? Until next time, remember every chapter you write today shapes your legacy tomorrow. Thank you for joining us at Thoughtful Planning. And just like the vibrant hues of a setting sun, we're wrapping up another episode of Thoughtful Planning. Every shared story and insight is a step closer to turning uncertainty into celebrations of preparedness.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, remember that every surprise that comes our way is an opportunity to grow, adapt, and learn. Stay tuned for more stories, expert insight, and of course, a touch of wit in our next episode.
We're not just co-hosts, we're fellow travelers on this journey. For more information on additional resources, which will help you take the next step in planning, look for the link in the show notes for our membership. Join us next time for another episode of Thoughtful Planning. Until then, keep living, laughing, and loving every moment.